I roar like thunder, my heart's aflame. Truth my armor, you'll know my name. Through the shadows, I stake my claim. This lion's pride will never be tame. I stand my ground, I hold the light. Words like arrows in the night. I'm the latter-day lion. With power I'm trying to fight the lies with fire inside. Latter-day lion, I keep on climbing. The truth is my pride, my roar is my guide. They throw their stones, but I don't fall. Their whispers crumble against my call. I see the doubt, but I see it all. A mountain stands where they see a wall. Claws in the sand, eyes to the sky. Every word a battle cry. Strength and faith I can't deny. This lion lives and lions don't die. I'm the latter-day lion. With power I'm trying to fight the lies with fire inside. Latter-day lion, I keep on climbing. The truth is my pride, my roar is my guide. The fire of the restoration burns with holy strength from the Savior's arm. Standing tall in the light, called now for the fight. The lions of Judah and Ephraim unite. I'm the latter-day lion. With power I'm trying to fight the lies with fire inside. Latter-day lion, I keep on climbing. The truth is my pride, my roar is my guide.
All right.
Round table. Ask says to do round table. We'll try round table.
Yeah, that may be the best option.
Yeah, that looks good.
Gotta love technical difficulties right at the
agree.
beginning, eh?
My gosh, guys, don't know what the heck that was.
Is Josh in here yet? Bring him up. Is there still lots of static?
I'm not hearing static. I'm not.
hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get. Somebody's requesting. Josh is here. Do you know where Devin?
I'm trying to get a hold of him. Let's see. I see Gospel Ginger in here. Ginger, can you get a hold of Devin? See if we can get him in here. I sent him the link, but he hasn't responded.
Oh, yeah, the AC is loud. I will be muted for most of it. I'm in a camper, so I will literally die of heat if I turn it off. Because I couldn't make it to my office, so I had to make do.
Need to fire the tech guy. Yep, absolutely.
Sorry, Moxie, bro. What the heck? Thank you for the roses, guys. Thank you, every female werewolf ever, for all the hearts. I look like a Mormon today, I guess. Yeah.
All right. I don't know where Devin is. I don't know if you want to have somebody else collect questions for you or not.
Thank you for the roses.
If Gospel Ginger is willing, but if Devin doesn't make it in, then Gospel Ginger, if you're willing, would you come up and field questions for us? The Jesuits got him.
The secret Jesuit operatives, man, and knocked on his door. You cannot collect questions.
Yeah.
I don't have Devin's number. All right. I'm just going to invite Sammy. We'll just have Sammy.
All right.
So, Sammy, what we're going to have you do, at least until you can. Oh, his mic's not working.
Oh, criminy. Let's see.
Bro, the Jesuit operatives are working overtime.
Yeah. Let's see here. He's having major mic problems. All right. Well, Midas, you up for it? For whatever reason, Devin's not answering.
Bastimus said he can. Whatever. It's up to you.
You know what, Bast? Yeah, why don't you come on up here? Why don't Bastimus come up?
Where's he at? I don't know who this. Somebody keeps requesting. I have no idea who they are. I thought I blocked them, but. All right, Bastimus. So what we'll have you do is you're going to collect questions for Lance. So for the people in the comments, we are going to have a Q&A section at the end. So if you want to ask Latter-day Lion a question, please direct it toward Jasu that is underneath Lance. And if you want to ask Lance a question, direct it to Bastimus. So if you guys want to type them out, write them down, however you want to do it.
For a front-end service team supervisor at Walmart.
That's how we'll do the Q&A session at the end. And then there goes Bastimus.
Gotta love tech issues, right, guys?
My gosh. What a way to start.
Spent half an hour trying to get the everything situated up, and you just ran
Yeah,
off.
I don't know. I tested this
Sorry, tech
internet.
issues.
Tested this internet.
Mm.
Do we agree mod abuse won't be tolerated? Yes, Dave, that has already been addressed. All right. Let me... You guys ready to get started?
Oh, it looks like Devin's here. All right, cool.
Okay.
Oh, sweet. Perfect.
Jesuits let him go.
The Jesuits let him go, yep. They had to remember who they gave the space lasers to.
All right. Devin, if you want to request up, I don't see you down
he's
there
up.
for some. There he is. Okay, so if you want to ask Lance a question during the Q&A, please direct it to Latter-day Logic, and vice versa. If you want to ask Lion a question, direct it to Jasu on the panel, and then we will go over those. You want to do maybe like 3 questions each?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Okay, 5? Lance wants. Okay, so 5 questions.
5
We'll give you a
questions, that's
minute to respond, and then 45 seconds for the other person to respond.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, and then did Devin?
I don't know
leave?
what happened to Devin.
My goodness. Q&A might not be happening, folks. I don't know what is going on.
The Mossad just keeps, having, like, admittedly, I think he pissed off Mossad when he had his debate earlier today. So,
Goodness. All right. I don't know what we want to do about. Okay, there he is. He's back. We'll add him up. All right.
Sorry. Technical difficulties.
My goodness.
that seemed to be the theme of the day, Devin.
Devin,
Even in
after
your
your
debate.
debate earlier, yeah, you should have gotten the technical difficulties taken care of on your end. You dealt with it so much earlier.
You're right. Phew. Okay. All right. So I'm looking for questions for Latter-day Lion.
Now the other one,
No,
you're looking for questions for Lance.
You're going to be getting for Lance.
Okay. Sorry. Say that again.
So if somebody wants to ask Lance a question, they're going to direct them to you, and vice versa for Latter-day Lion. They'll direct them to Josu. This, not that you guys would give lowball questions, but it makes it easier to make sure that we don't have a bunch of lowball questions being asked and try to make it fair. Obviously, don't pick the most ridiculous questions. Just try to pick the best questions that we can. We'll do 5 questions, a minute to respond, and then about 45 seconds for the other person to respond to that same question.
Got it. Cool. Great.
Okay, right on. Well, let me get rid of the green screen here. We will just have to go off of the iPad. Whenever you are ready.
Yeah, so before I get started, I do want to ask for prayers for those fighting the fires up in Tremonton. It's apparently pretty bad up there. A mutual friend of ours, Zandriel, is one of the people helping with evacuations up there. So,
wow.
Yeah, so the, just thoughts and prayers for them as well. So, all right. In 2012, CNN hosted a town hall debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. The debate was moderated by CNN's Democratic strategist Candy Crowley, and during the debate, she ended up joining President Obama to debate Romney herself, a controversial move that followed her for 2 years before she finally left CNN. While I doubt our moderator tonight will do the same as Miss Crowley, there was a feeling that I had that I just couldn't shake. Because of that, I felt like I should give myself some extra time to prepare. I figured 10 minutes would be enough. It was going to be 5, but I didn't want to risk it. In all seriousness, though, despite my being a Latter-day Saint, when it comes to this particular debate topic, once again, according to the historical record, only the emperor would call, convene, and ratify an ecumenical council with or without the consent of Rome, or rather the Bishop of Rome. I'm not arguing as a Latter-day Saint. And this is despite the fact that the theological implications of the first 7 councils and their resulting creeds have no bearing on my beliefs theologically. When push comes to shove, this is not a theological debate. It's a historical one. Next slide, please. Which means the arguments presented must be found in the available historical record as the events took place. As this debate is restricted to the first 7 accepted councils, an attempt to revise the record by a council after the fact, such as the Lumen Gentium in Vatican II, is off the table, as are any presumptions where the record is silent. What we are discussing is how it would have been understood at the time, before the events of the Great Schism in the 11th century. This requires that for a rigorous standard of historical accuracy and honesty, we must refer to what is accepted by both East and West. Why? Because after the schism, the definition of an ecumenical council shifted, in the West at least, to begin to include councils and synods that were popping up like daisies in the medieval period. The only time in Christian history when the church agreed on the criteria for an ecumenical council was in the first millennium. This is our only valid testing. This is our only valid testing ground, which means we have to understand what those living from the 4th through 8th centuries would have understood as call, convene, and ratify within their framework, not after the fact. And this is not something that has to be pieced together either. Just by using Catholic frameworks like those posed by historian Karl Joseph von Hefele in his multi-volume history of the councils, a council's legitimacy is broken down into 3 separate factors: convocation, direction, and confirmation. For the purposes of tonight's debate, they would be interchanged with call, convene, and ratify. So how are these factors understood in those 4 centuries? Next slide, please. By call, it is the act by which a universal assembly is summoned. Who is issuing the orders? Who is establishing the time and place? And who is required to attend? By convene, it is the practical act of bringing the assembly into existence. What are the conditions the bishops must actually meet, maintaining order, and facilitating the proceedings either in person or by direct proxy? By ratify, it is the act of not only declaring, but enforcing the decisions of the council. So our primary evidence has to be the actual events surrounding these councils. Who called them? Who summoned the participants? Who provided the logistical and financial machinery necessary to assemble them? Who presided over their proceedings? Who enforced their decisions? And what happened when those decisions were challenged? Next slide, please. This last point is particularly important because so many people get it wrong. If we want to know what made a council ecumenical, we should not begin with a definition created centuries later and then search through the 4th through 8th centuries for examples that fit. Later definitions formulated from the 9th century onward cannot be used if they are descriptions or prescriptions of what Christians between those 4 centuries knew and believed, no matter how authoritative they may be currently. There's no evidence Constantine believed that in 325. There's no evidence Theodosius believed that in 381. There's no evidence Justinian believed that in 553, and on down the list. It's also not evident of what actually happened in all 7 of those councils. Again, what we are examining here is not a theological claim, especially since the historical record points out that anything other than the emperor's signature was, again, symbolic in nature. We need to set the theological definitions aside and ask the pertinent historical question. What happened? Next slide, please. And when we set ourselves out to answer that, something remarkably consistent shows up. Next slide. The emperors were not simply spectators sitting in the stands watching an umpire call balls and strikes. And they weren't just the umpires either. They were the entire league. They set the schedule, built the stadium, and had the final say of who stayed on the roster. They were the political and administrative machinery that made the councils possible to begin with. They were the ones who determined the topics of the council, summoned the participants, sent commissioners, gave the final determination for where and when the councils were to take place, provided transportation, security, and other expenses out of the imperial treasury, and even opened and closed sessions. On top of that, and this is probably the most critical part, only the emperor had the authority to enforce the decisions. Scholars like Philip Schaff in his History of the Christian Church point out that councils like Nicaea and Constantinople I were called and convened without any advice or consent from the Bishop of Rome. Next slide, please. And while, yes, Schaff was a Protestant, Catholic contemporaries such as Hefele concede this point, stating in his essays on the matter that the first 8 councils were appointed and convoked by the emperors, all subsequent councils, on the contrary, by the popes. Before Hefele attempts to backpedal hard and couch it with, but even in those councils, there appears to be a certain participation of the popes in their convocation, more or less prominent in particular instances. There is a problem with this, though. With that attempt to soften the blow, there is nothing for Hefele to back his claim up, even with some contemporaries, including Schaff, calling it what it is, an unsupported assertion, not a documented fact. Next slide, please. This is where the tradition set forth from Nicaea I in 325 all the way up to Nicaea II in 787. The opening material of which includes an imperial edict by Constantine VI and Irene that points out that the bishops were to meet in Nicaea by, quote, the grace of God and by the command of our pious sovereignty. And this isn't the only occasion. We have the documents. We have the summons. This is imperial involvement from beginning to end, including what ratification would look like. Going back to Nicaea I, the entire purpose was to determine if Arius's claims held any water. The issue at hand is that Arius was already excommunicated in Alexandria, roughly 4 years prior to the council. However, because there was no enforcement mechanism to take in place, it was excommunication in name only, convincing bishops in Caesarea Palestina that he wasn't actually ousted from communion. After the council, The enforcement mechanism was put in place. Arius' excommunication was reinstated, he was exiled to Illyricum, and his own writings were ordered to be destroyed. Not by any bishop, but by the empire. And that's what ratification looked like. Not simply a confirmation of what the council states, but the enforcement behind it. In other words, that ratification must have teeth. Simply declaring someone or something anathema did nothing without the enforcement to back it up. And the punishment for the Arian heresy after Nicaea I? Exile. And it's the same pattern that's showcased throughout the other councils, because, like my opponent will likely attempt to argue, these aren't cherry-picked. These are the rules. Constantinople I in 381, Theodosius stripped churches who refused Nicaea and gave them to bishops who did, an imperial decree based on what the empire, not the church, felt was correct. After Ephesus in 431, a council declared Nestorius anathema, to which Nestorius responded with an up yours, while still living in his own monastery in Antioch. It wasn't until 4 years later, when Emperor Theodosius II ratified the council, that forced Nestorius into exile in the Egyptian desert, and his own writings destroyed. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it should. That same gap we saw between the aspects of being condemned and actual consequences. Once again, by that same office. Now, due to time, I can't go through the rest, but the pattern is already clear. Next slide, please. These are 7 councils, 7 emperors, 7 separate acts of enforcement spanning 4 centuries on completely unrelated theological disputes. And in every single case, the same office holds the pen that actually makes the ruling stick. The emperor. Next slide, please. Now, just as a reminder, we have the aspects of the call, the imperial summons, documented at both ends of this period of Christian history from Nicaea I to Nicaea II. Convening, imperial direction of the actual proceedings, any others holding a ceremonial rank at best, and ratify, the enforcement mechanism with actual teeth every single time. Next slide, please. So we have here all of the other councils here. So go and go to the next slide, please. So probably the last one. So go to the last slide if you can. There we go. And while participation from anywhere, but especially Rome, is present at 6 of 7 of these councils, participation is not the same as authority. And on the specific question in front of us this evening, the actual record doesn't leave much, if any, room for debate. It was the emperor seated on the imperial throne every single time. And with that, I'll yield my time.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, let me just get Lance's slides pulled up. Again, I apologize about the iPad. There were technical difficulties.
I'd like to say real quick that it is the feast day of the queenship of our Blessed Mother. And so, you know, make sure to say a couple prayers. Yeah. Yo, a galaxy. That's crazy. I've never actually gotten a galaxy, guys. It's pretty awesome. All right.
All right. Lance, whenever you are ready, I will start your timer when you start speaking.
And it's 10 minutes and 30 seconds, right?
Yes, I gave 30 extra seconds for you guys to say next slide.
I'm gonna set a timer on my end too.
Sure.
Alrighty. So, you can go to the next slide. So my first quotation is actually not on this, as it's a quotation that I discovered while reading St. Athanasius, but I think it's very relevant. St. Athanasius says, "For if a judgment had been passed by bishops, what concern had the emperor with it? Or if it was only a threat of the emperor, what need in that case was there of the so-named bishops? When was such a thing heard of before from the beginning of the world? When did a judgment of the church receive its validity from the emperor? Or rather, when was his decree ever recognized by the church? There have been many councils held heretofore, and many judgments passed by the church, but the fathers never sought the consent of the emperor thereto, nor did the emperor busy himself with the affairs of the church." It's really interesting that Athanasius would say this, given that he was a deacon present at Nicaea. Obviously, he knows that Constantine enjoyed material convocation of the council that he called the bishops. But let's keep reading. In Nicaea, 2, session 6, they say, "And how can a council be great and ecumenical when it received neither the recognition nor assent from the primates of the other churches, but they consigned it to anathema? It did not enjoy the cooperation of the then Pope of Rome or his priests, neither by means of his representatives or by an encyclical letter, as is the rule for councils. Nor did it win the assent of the patriarchs of the East, of Alexandria, Antioch, and the Holy City, or of their priests and bishops." No mention of an emperor there. And finally, I have the words of Emperor Valentinian I. He reigned right after Nicaea, saying, quote, "I am but one of the laity, and therefore have no right to interfere in these transactions. Let the priests to whom such matters appertain assemble where they please." Next slide, please. The duty of my opponent is to show that the emperors alone, according to their own power, called, convened, and ratified the first 7 ecumenical councils of the church without the consent of the Bishop of Rome. In fact, the resolution is that this duty pertained only to the emperor. Thus, he must show from the historical record an instance of an emperor by his sole authority, ratifying one or all of the 7 councils. Next slide, please. My claim. Across the first 7 councils, imperial authority did, in fact, supply summons, logistics, civil promulgation, and civil coercion. Yet, the record distinguishes those acts very clearly from the canonical judgment and ecclesiastical reception. I can clarify from the start that the material convocation of a council was at one point the duty of the imperial power. However, this is not what constitutes the ecumenicity of a council, which my opponent attempts to prove is the duty of an emperor. Next slide, please. There are 3 functions pertaining to a council. I don't quite take Hefele's list, but they're very close. Material convocation, arranging and ordering the meeting, summons, venue, transport, and order. This pertains to imperial power. Civil ratification, making the council's decisions imperial law. This is promulgation and enforcement civilly. This pertains to imperial power. And ecclesiastical ratification reception, which is the recognizing the teachings of a council as binding upon the universal church. This pertains to the episcopate alone, and specifically to the Roman pontiff. Next slide, please. As to material convocation, that material convocation and civil ratification of a council has to be done by emperors throughout history is an easy concession for any Catholic to make, as this is not what makes a council ecumenical. Material convocation, simply put, is the duty of him who has the monetary means to issue summons to all the bishops of the world and orchestrate their transport and provide a venue, for example, St. Mary's in Ephesus. And of course, maintain order during a council. In the early church, the only individual who had the means to properly material convoke a council was the emperor. Later in church history, we see that the Roman pontiff himself had the means to fulfill this material convocation, and as such, an emperor was no longer needed. Thus, an emperor is only needed due to a lack of material means on the side of the bishops, not due to necessity. We clearly see this in the Council of Chalcedon. In letter 98 from the Council of Chalcedon to Pope Leo, it says, quote, "For if there are 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he said that there is in the midst of them, there he is in the midst of them. Must he not have been so much more particularly present with 520 priests who preferred the spread of knowledge concerning him to their country and their ease, of whom you were chief, as the head to the members, showing your goodwill in the person of those who represented you, while our religious emperors presided to the furtherance of due order, inviting us to restore the doctrinal fabric of the church, even as Zerubbabel invited Joshua to build Jerusalem." Note the very clear language here when speaking about the priests. Leo is head to members, whereas the emperor presided to the furtherance of due order. This material convocation, however, does not get my opponent to his intended conclusion, as it has no bearing on ecclesiastical ratification or the promulgation of dogma, which civil ratification always follows. Joshua and Zerubbabel, who are they? Next slide, please. There is an interesting type that the Chalcedonian fathers call upon in their comparison of Leo and the emperor to Joshua and Zerubbabel. Take a look at how the contemporaries of the council interpreted this. He, Zerubbabel, built the temple of the Lord and sat on his throne, and he ruled with the authority of a prince. But the high priest, it says, Jesus, son of Zehodak, shall sit on the priestly throne, and they will both govern the people of God, united in spirit and counsel. This is interesting. The analogy the fathers intended to draw was one of unity between civil authority, who has the material means to bring the order, or in Zerubbabel's case, to build the temple, and the priestly throne, who has the ecclesial authority as head to members. Next slide, please. The Empress Pulcheria herself recognizes that she needs an authority of the Roman pontiff to call a council which intends to be universal. Quote, and therefore let your reverence deign to give notice in whatever manner shall seem best, and so that all the bishops of the whole East as well, and that of Thrace and Illyricum, as it has been also pleased our Lord, the most pious emperor, my husband, may be able to assemble swiftly from the eastern regions in one city, and that once a council has been held, they may decree, with you as the authority concerning the Catholic confession and concerning those bishops who were separated before this, as faith and Christian piety require. The Greek text of this, of you as the authority, is so authontontos. Those words indicate that Pulcheria is calling upon Pope Leo to consent, convoke, and ratify the council as its principal authority. That's what authontontos means, principal authority, as its master. If my opponent's reading of the history is correct, why is the Empress appealing to Pope Leo to be the principal authority and not her own husband? Next slide, please. Some may object and say that Pulcheria is merely granting this honor to Pope St. Leo, but this objection would not be effective. We see in the time of Nicaea and Sardica that Osius of Cordoba writes to Emperor Constantius II, saying, quote, cease these proceedings, I beseech you, and remember that you are a mortal man. Be afraid of the day of judgment, and keep yourself pure thereunto. Intrude not yourself into ecclesiastical matters, neither give commands unto us concerning them, but learn them from us. God has put into your hands the kingdom, to us he has entrusted the affairs of his church. If the emperor had ecclesial authority to declare a council as ecumenical, or even call it apart from the bishops, why does the very presiding bishop at Nicaea deny this outright? It is furthermore clear that this was the mind of the church. St. Ambrose, in his letter to Emperor Valentinian, says, quote, when have you heard, most gracious emperor, that laymen gave judgment concerning a bishop in a matter of faith? Who is there that can deny that in a matter of faith, in a matter, I say, of faith, bishops are to be the judge of Christian emperors, not emperors the judges of bishops? Next slide, please. Actually, can you just skip to the one after? Because I'm running out of time here. So the case for the Council of Nicaea. My opponent will primarily appeal to the Nicene Council as evidence of imperial authority being exercised over a council without the consent of the Roman pontiff. But his argument is primarily from silence and a misread of the contemporaries. The Church has a clear tradition that demonstrates Roman consent of the council. The Third Constantinopolitan councils, the fathers declared, quote, Arius, divider and partitioner of the Trinity, was rising up, and straightway Constantine, ever Augustus, and Sylvester the Praiseworthy were assembling the great and illustrious Synod of Nicaea, through which the Trinity both dictated the symbol of faith and promulgated the sentence against Arian malice. Furthermore, we know from the testimony of church historians that Osius of Cordoba signed first, followed by Vito and Vincentius, the Roman priests sent as legates by Sylvester. The Cycicene writes duly, quote, Hosius, Bishop of Cordoba, and the holy churches of God in Rome, Spain, all Italy, and the other provinces beyond me up to the ocean, through the Roman priests Vito and Vincentius accompanying him. Socrates Scholasticus says very similar. This is not on my slide, but Socrates denotes the order of attendance in the same exact way. Furthermore, Constantine himself says, quote, for that which has commended itself to the judgment, next slide. For that which has commended itself to the judgment of 300 bishops cannot be other than the doctrine of God, seeing that the Holy Spirit dwelling in the minds of so many dignified persons effectually enlighten them respecting the divine will. This is the letter of Constantine to the congregation of Alexandria, which clearly indicates that in the mind of Constantine, the doctrinal decision rested in the hands of the bishops themselves and not his imperial power. Furthermore, following which voice the 318 Holy Fathers gathered at Nicaea conferred upon the Holy Roman Church the confirmation of matters and authority, both of which all the successions guard by the grace of Christ even to our own age. This is recorded by a Synod of Rome in 485, headed by Felix III. The idea that Sylvester had some influence upon the decisions of the council is reflected before the dating of the pseudo-Sylvestrian forgeries, so that cannot be claimed against them. And finally, my last slide. Father Domenico Palmieri, the great De Ecclesia historian of the 19th century, says, in the subscriptions, the first to subscribe is Osius with the title of Bishop of alone, followed by Vitus and Vincent with his title. We, priests of Rome, have subscribed in the place of our venerable Lord and Bishop, the Holy Sylvester. But first, Osius, if it's good with y'all, I could just finish this slide off.
Lion, do you care if he finishes that slide?
Okay, this is the last slide. But first, Osius therefore presided. Yet by what title did the Bishop of Cordoba preside over a universal council at which patriarchs were present? The right of presiding depends not on personal merit, but on the dignity of the see. We can see the testimony of Pope Liberius not long after the Council of Nicaea when talking about the Ariminum Council. No prejudice could arise from the number of those who were assembled at Rimini, since it established that neither the Roman bishop, whose sentence was to be sought before all others, nor Vincentius, whose stainless episcopate had lasted so many years, gave any consent. Liberius presided at the time between Nicaea and Constantinople. He was going against Rimini, also known as Ariminum. And finally, Pope St. Julius, as relayed by Socrates and Sosman, 5th century historians investigating the controversy of early ante-Nicene councils. Quote, Julius, writing back to those who were assembled at Antioch, reproved them, first for the bitterness of their letter, then for acting contrary to the canons, because they had not invited him to the synod, since the ecclesiastical canon orders that the churches shall not make canons against the judgment of the Bishop of Rome. Notice the consistent claims of the pontiffs that the Bishop of Rome is absolutely necessary due to sacerdotal law for the ratification and consent of the council. This is, of course, before the Council of Sardica, which many claim gave the Roman pontiff this prerogative. At that, I rest.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me just put this back on. Do you want, since the rebuttals are kind of off the cuff, Lion, do you want to have like an extra maybe minute to account for him going over how?
Yeah, I think that was it. That'll be all right.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Lance, do you have any issues with that? Okay. All right. So 5-minute rebuttals.
Okay. I want you to notice something here. Lance actually took the definition of what it would actually mean to ratify and flipped it on its head, thereby changing it from an actual substance with teeth into something that, again, was only symbolic in nature. Again, the aspects of the ratification element, which admittedly is probably the biggest sticking point in all of this, is what did this have to do with anybody? Remember, in Nicaea 1, the entire aspect of it was because Arius's excommunication didn't stick. The ratification of his excommunication wasn't there until after the emperor had signed it. It's the same thing with all of the others. Now, again, we're talking about the influence that was taking place here. Keep in mind, influence is not the same as authority. Now, again, influence is not the same as authority, because when push comes to shove, the authority to really enforce all of these has to come through that civil ratification. And in every single instance that was brought up, for instance, the letter from Athanasius, this is actually a bit of an issue here, because Athanasius was exiled no less than 4 times and brought back because of his own issues with the Council of Nicaea. We also have the, let me see here, because I actually did have this up here. Here we go. This is, yeah. So around 358, roughly about 30 years after the council took place, Athanasius was actually hiding from the emperor's soldiers in a specific protest to his actual exile. But at the same time, the only reason why he would have been hiding would have been because the creeds were determined to be civil law. It didn't matter if the Roman pontiff had said anything. It didn't matter if the Roman pontiff had signed anything. And keep in mind, as well, he mentioned Nicaea 2 as well. But there was no instance of the Roman pontiff or any of his legates hosting Nicaea 2, simply because it was in Greek. And the Roman pontiff or his legates couldn't speak Greek. And so anyone that was in charge of that had to be in line there. The issue at hand, again, has to do with who had the ability to call. He mentioned earlier about the ability of the Roman pontiff being able to use its own treasury. However, keeping in mind the scope of the first 7 councils, within the scope of the first 7 councils, the Roman pontiff did not have the finances in order to summon, transport, provide security, or anything else regarding the ecumenical councils. This is after the Seventh Council in Nicaea. All of these instances, again, did not prove anything regarding what ratification actually looked like. Despite the fact if Rome actually accepted or even understood what the ruling of the council was, the civil authority was already in place. The church and the state was interlinked. But that doesn't mean that the church held the authority to actually enforce what was done. Again, it has to have teeth. And with that, I yield my time.
All right, Lance, I will start your countdown when you start speaking.
Awesome, thank you so much. So there's a couple claims that he made here. First and foremost, let's go to Theodosius on imperial authority. He says that Emperor Theodosius decreed against these churches that they should be exiled. But why does he say he does that? Actually, he's very clear as to why he says he does that. He says, quote, "It is our will that all of our subjects should follow the religion taught by the prince of the apostles to the Romans, and having observed by the reigning Pope Damasus and by Peter, Bishop of Alexandria, a man of apostolic sanctity, that in conformity with the Gospels and with apostolic teaching, we may believe only one indivisible Godhead of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. We decree that those alone are thus to be called Catholics." So why does Theodosius say that he does this? Because of the decision of Pope Damasus and Bishop Peter of Alexandria. Theodoret in his ecclesiastical history says, quote, "He enacted a law enjoining that the pastors who had been banished should be recalled and restored to their flocks, and that the houses of God should be given up to those who held communion with Damasus, who was the Bishop of Rome." So it's clear from that he is doing this as a result of his unity with Damasus. And you should hear what he has to say about Damasus in other places, but I won't get into that. He brings up Athanasius in exile, but unfortunately, this cuts against him hard. Why was Athanasius exiled? He was exiled at the Council of Tyre.
Keep in mind, you're supposed to be rebuttaling against my opening statement, not the rebuttal.
Yeah. So
Again?
please don't interrupt during this portion.
Wait, can I not rebuttal his rebuttal?
It is supposed to be against his opening statement.
Ah, okay. Oh, beautiful. Then in that case, we'll go over to this other one. So he talks about Constantine not making a delineation between the ecclesiastical and the civil authority. But what's interesting is that Constantine himself recognizes that it's an imperial decision. He says, quote, "When I was told of the division that had arisen amongst you, I was convinced that I ought not to attend to any business before this. And it is from the desire of being useful to you that I have convened you without delay. But I shall not believe my end to be attained until I have united all the minds of all, until I see that peace and union reign amongst you, for which you are commissioned as the anointed of the Lord to preach to others." So what does Constantine say? What does Constantine say he's going to do here? He's waiting for them to make a decision. And then after that, he will reflect this unity. This reflection is actually clear. He says that I said it's only symbolic in nature. If you listen to my slideshow again, I actually expressly say this is enforcement civilly. It's civil coercion. Civil coercion. I recognize that it's coercion. But why does that coercion take place? It takes place as a result of an ecclesial decision. A result of the ecclesial decision. So, Constantine furthermore says, quote, "For that which has commended itself to the judgment of 300 bishops cannot be that other than the doctrine of God, seeing that the Holy Spirit dwelling in the minds of so many dignified persons has effectually enlightened them respecting the divine will." So, what does Constantine once again say? It's the judgment of the bishops, reflecting the divine will. So what is Constantine going to do with this? He's going to take this and he's going to put their decision into effect. There's no problem with this. Civil coercion is fine. There's no issue with that. What we're saying is that my opponent is doing is he's confusing the civil ratification as what makes it binding. And as I will show later in this debate, that's absolutely not the case. I'll rest the rest of my time.
Okay, so we are going to be going to the cross exam now. There's going to be 2 rounds, 7 minutes each. So Latter-day Lion is going to start. He will be the first one to ask the questions. Keep in mind, Lion, this time is yours. So you can, I mean, within reason, interrupt him if he's kind of going on a little too long. That is within your right. This is your time. So let's keep it cordial. This can usually get a little bit heated because it's kind of an open-ish dialogue, but you are allowed to interrupt if you feel like he's not giving a proper answer. Lance can ask a clarifying question, but he's not allowed to ask regular questions. So if he doesn't understand something, he is allowed to clarify, but not ask further questions from there.
Okay. All right.
Does that sound good to both of you guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so Lion, we will do. Can I do a 7-minute countdown timer?
I don't think you can. Well, you might be able to.
I can. So I will start that whenever you are ready.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, thanks for being with us, Lance. So first question: if an ecumenical council required ecclesiastical ratification, but the emperor refused to sign it into imperial law, did that ratification have the power to exile heretics, seize church property, or enforce order in and out of the church?
So there's a couple things that you mentioned there that are kind of blending through lines. So as to exile, I would say this is principally the duty of an emperor. As to the question of whether or not these anathemas can actually take place, sure, that's absolutely going to be true. Because as we see with some other councils that don't have direct imperial ratification, such as, I mean, truthfully, the Council of Sardica, while it did have imperial ratification, it was kind of forgotten about. It makes this clear that this is actually the responsibility of the Bishop of Rome to do these things, to exile and to hear the cases of others. Sardica makes this clear. And this is just a few years after Nicaea.
So why wasn't Sardica included in the Ecumenical Council, and why didn't the emperor follow that council as well?
Yeah, so an interesting thing about this is that it actually had material convocation of an emperor. The only difference is the fact that it did not have the ratification of the Bishop of Rome insofar that it was perceived to be a general council. It does have a partial ratification in the sense that it is an approved council, but it's not considered general.
Okay. Is papal consent mandatory to convene a council?
And by convene, do you mean material convocation or ecclesiastical recognition?
Well, in order to organize and to gather participants.
To gather participants? No. But it's worthy of mention that when I say no, a council is not truly going to be considered ecumenical until after it has the reception of the Roman pontiff. So we could say that an emperor has the ability to convene a general council without the consent of Rome, or a local council without the consent of Rome. But I would not say it would be ecumenical until it's actually received. So take that how you.
Okay. So in that case, then, why did Justinian's council successfully meet, pass decrees, and alter church history while Vigilius was actively boycotting?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring this up because Vigilius, he actually, and this is actually what Father Richard Price has to say about this whole occasion. While Vigilius was initially protesting the council, it was actually his voice that ended up being the confirming case in the council. And I actually have Father Richard Price, the one who translated the Acts of the Council of Constantinople II into English. He says, quote, let's see, right here. He could not have stated more unambiguously that his decree was final and left no room for discussion, since at the very same time an ecumenical council was in progress of discussing the very same questions. He implied that his own authority surpassed that of any council. Father Price goes on to say, quote, He confirmed the decrees of the council, but he did not confirm its authority. Indeed, he made no mention of it at all. Instead, he took over the decrees and issued them in his own name. Again, it is his own voice that was presented as definitive. Quote, we therefore anathematize and condemn the aforesaid 3 impious chapters. Another interesting thing about this is the fact that Justinian, the entire time the council was going on, was trying to get consent from Vigilius because he knew he needed it. And I don't have the citation in front of me, but Richard Price even himself says this. He says, this entire council was at risk of not being considered general because of the fact that Vigilius was not present, or he didn't have any legates. But Vigilius did assent, as Evagrius Scholasticus records in 593 AD, quote, now Vigilius assented in writing, but he chose not to attend. That's all he says. An Eastern bishop, this would have been on their minds if this was the case. But instead, all Evagrius says is Vigilius assented in writing, but chose not to attend.
Okay, so the keeping in mind that this has to be based on the historical record, what the historical record does state is that Vigilius was essentially abducted and forced to come into I believe it was Chalcedon, if I remember right. There's a lot that's rattling through my brain right now. It was Constantinople. Thank you. And basically was forced under threat of exile after his legates were already exiled in order to ratify. But the problem is, wouldn't that already mean that the emperor had authority despite Vigilius's protest?
No, not at all, because we're having to distinguish between civil authority and ecclesial authority. Pope Justinian was threatening to exile Vigilius, which was impious. And what's interesting is your claim that said, oh, well, he had him on house arrest and forced him to sign. Once again, Father Richard Price, the one who translated the Acts, says when he capitulated to imperial pressure and came to sign his second letter to Eutyches and the second Constitution, he in no way lessened his claims. This is where he goes on to say he confirmed the decrees of the council. So, like, Justinian absolutely had the power to exile somebody, but there was no ability for him to ecclesiastically depose an emperor. In fact, the very acts of the council record this. When Vigilius when Justinian tried to strike the name of Vigilius from the diptychs, this was removed from the acts of the council because they knew Justinian did not have the power to do so, as Richard Price himself also says, who is the leading historian on Constantinople too.
So again, I don't think that quite answered my question, so I'll rephrase. If anything other than the imperial seal made the council valid and binding, what need would there have been to coerce anyone into acceptance?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my question to you. Why did he need the assent of Vigilius? That's what.
Can't ask questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm posing it as a rhetorical question. Vigilius consented to the council. Justinian needed his consent to ratify the council. This doesn't help you. It helps my case. He was begging for.
Okay, that is time for Lion. Lance, I will give you your 7-minute countdown whenever you start speaking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you mentioned the case of Athanasius's exile earlier. The Council of Tyre, which was actually the trial against St. Athanasius, had the consent of Constantine. He summoned the bishops, as Hefele himself testifies. Constantine himself testifies that he wrote to the bishops on this. And then he exiles Athanasius, and this is when Athanasius went into hiding. It's interesting because Tyre used all the same exact machinery and civil ratification that Nicaea.
You gotta ask a question.
It's right here. It had all of the ratification that Nicaea had, but it's not counted as ecumenical even at the time. Why is that?
So when it comes to this, let's see, how do I say this? Mainly because the creed had force in it for the empire. You know, just because there wasn't any Roman participation didn't mean it still didn't have effect within the empire. And it was still being implemented civilly empire-wide.
Okay. So it was implemented civilly, but it wasn't received by anyone outside of Constantinople and Antioch? I'm confused.
Well, that wouldn't necessarily matter. If it was within the empire, it would still have that same ecumenical power. It wasn't until the following emperor that that it was eventually overturned.
So do you know the reason Pope Julius gives as to why this council is not ecumenical? Immediately after, in 341, which is only 6 years
It was
after the council.
primarily because it basically overturned Nicaea, and as some records put it, everyone woke up Arian.
So Julius actually says this. He says in as recorded by Athanasius, Julius says, quote, again, and why was nothing said to the church of the said to us concerning the church of the Alexandrians in particular? Are you ignorant to the custom? Are you ignorant that the custom has been for word to be written to us and then for a just decision to be passed from this place? So why is it that Julius is saying that the decisions of the council had to be sent to him? In fact, he goes on to write that not so have the constitutions of Paul, not so have the traditions of the fathers directed. This is another form of procedure, a novel practice. Why is he saying that this is a novel practice if this was apparently what was being done by Tyre and Nicaea?
More of a formality.
A formality. Is that why only a few years later they convened Sardica to overturn the Council of Tyre?
Like, again, this is ultimately in line with, again, keeping within the scope of the 7 ecumenical councils. The overturning of the previous council that was later accepted wasn't in force until after the previous emperor had died and a new one was in place.
Okay. Why would you say that the 7 ecumenical councils that are currently held today by both East and West are considered ecumenical, but Sardica, Tyre, and these are not?
Again,
because they had all the same imperial ratification and convocation.
Yeah, so we're talking about 2 separate councils, but the same imperial office. So the emperors don't necessarily have to agree with previous councils in order to overturn them by new councils going forward. So that's the issue at hand, is that the emperors were the ones who ultimately had the seal in order to enforce. Again, that ratification has to have teeth. And so if there is no teeth because the next emperor, overturns it, then that's no longer in force.
Okay, that would be a good answer if it weren't for the fact that I believe it was Emperor Anastasios, who was a monophysite, tried to overturn the Council of Chalcedon in the 5th century, 6th century, but he had no ability to do so because the church was the one who came up against him. In fact, Maximus the Confessor says this directly. I don't have the citation in front of me, I apologize, but I could probably find it. Why is it the case that Emperor Anastasios wasn't able to overturn Chalcedon if it was just an imperial council?
Oh, it wasn't just an imperial council, but he did hold the imperial pen, and at the same time, he didn't really have the desire to.
He didn't have the desire to. He was siding with the monophysites on a council which declared diaphysitism.
Yeah, again, with what the tradition was, it was only the emperor that could do such a thing. So within the historical context, he didn't really want to do anything. He wasn't a very effective emperor when push comes to shove. Again, when it came to the historical record. Again, we're basing things based on what the historical record says. If it's silent, it has to be, we have to admit that it is an argument from silence. If it's something that we have to presume something into, well, that wouldn't necessarily work either. So we have to go things based on what the historical record ultimately says.
This isn't really answering my question, because my question is kind of a double-edged sword here. Did an emperor have the ability to overturn a council, or did he not? Because if you say he did, then he could have overturned Chalcedon and he didn't.
Well, the issue here is that, again, with overturning a council, it required another council, at least in the emperor's minds. And so that was one of the things that needed to be brought up. So an emperor, at least with what they understood, they needed that extra council. And so if there isn't a council to determine that, because that's what these emperors did, then that's the issue at hand. And so if there was no council in place, there was nothing to reconsider.
So at the Council of Rimini, also called Ariminum, it had imperial ratification via Constantius II. There was no council that overturned it. Do you know why it was overturned?
I haven't been able to find much on the historical record on that.
For the Council of Ariminum? Well, I can tell you because Pope Damasus records Liberius on this. And of course, Liberius was a contemporary of the time. Liberius actually says this. Hold on, I apologize. Oh, is my time up? Okay, then I rest it.
Yes, sir. Yep. So, Lion, it is you again. I will, same thing, start the countdown when you begin speaking.
Yeah. In the 4th century, did the Bishop of Rome have any authority to order a bishop in Alexandria or Antioch to cross provincial borders?
To cross, sorry, say that again?
To cross provincial borders.
According to Theodosius and the Council of Sardica, yes.
Okay, under what civil statute?
I'm unaware of any civil statutes that would go to this, but I mean, they were still doing it nonetheless, as we can see with the case of Athanasius appealing to Pope Julius. We can see this in the case of St. John Chrysostom appealing to, I believe it was Liberius. Many people, as a result of the Council of Sardica, would come to Rome as their place to be heard by the Roman pontiff.
So again,
in fact, it's
the question is, what authority did the Roman pontiff have in order to order another bishop to cross provincial borders?
Yeah, I would say he had universal jurisdiction. So,
okay, so again, wouldn't universal jurisdiction require a civil statute?
Not under my view. I don't think it requires a civil statute.
What would your view be on this situation?
I mean, I believe it's a divine prerogative for bishops to be able to appeal to the Bishop of Rome if they feel like they've been treated unjustly in a local court.
And again, based on what statute that would have been found in the historical record at the time?
There wouldn't need to be a civil statute, but if you want something from the Code of Justinian where he says that this is the prerogative of Pope John II, then I can show it to you.
So the question again is, what authority did the Roman pontiff have to order other bishops to cross provincial borders?
Yeah, he had ecclesial authority, which is more than sufficient.
Okay, so what ecclesiastical authority overrode civil authority?
According to St. Ambrose, St. Athanasius, it always overrode civil authority. There, of course, were emperors who decided to go against this, but they were swiftly condemned for that. I mean, I can show you literally the case of Ambrose talking about this exact issue. He says, quote, and I quoted this in my opening statement, "When have you heard, most gracious emperor, that laymen gave judgment concerning a bishop of matter of faith?" And then he goes on and he says, "Who is there that can deny that in a matter of faith, in a matter, I say, of faith, bishops are wont to judge Christian emperors, not emperors of bishops?" And then he says, "The church belongs to God, therefore it ought to be assigned to Caesar, for the temple of God cannot be Caesar's by right." So ecclesial authority is more than sufficient for this, because all of the people at this era thought it was more than sufficient. You're asking, oh, where is the civil statute? But we're talking about a historical debate here. We see Athanasius appealing to Rome. He's crossing provincial borders. We see John Chrysostom, I believe, talking to Liberius. We see it actually occurring, and there's no imperial edict going out saying, oh, look, John Chrysostom is being a bad boy. You know, it's...
Who issued the summons for the bishops?
For a council?
For any of the 7 councils, yeah.
The summons were issued primarily by emperors, but I mean, in the case of Sardica, they say that it was Constantius II and Julius. And Julius says that this is a prerogative that has occurred continually. In fact, what the Third Constantinopolitan Council actually says about this is that, for example, with Nicaea, it says that it was convened by Constantine and Sylvester. It says that, for example, it even says that Constantinople I was a group work between Theodosius I and Damasus. It says that Ephesus was convened by the Pope and the Emperor. It says that Chalcedon was convened by the Pope and the Emperor. That's what Constantinople III has to say about it.
Okay, are you aware of the Cursus Publicus?
Yes.
Okay, what do you understand of what it was?
The Cursus Publicus. I've only read fragments out of it. I don't quite remember what its exact purpose was.
So this is the Cursus Publicus was the state-run imperial postal and transport network. It's basically the roads that connected every single province within the empire. So, but the thing is, though, is that each of the provinces had essentially border guards. They had border walls. So, given what that, and given this previous line of questioning, did anyone other than the emperor have the authority to grant bishops access to this road in order to travel safely?
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing about this. Even if I said that it's only the emperor who can give that ability, it doesn't matter to my point, because of the fact that you're once again confusing my entire premise of my debate.
Well, the answer is yes or no, Lance.
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. So only the emperor had the authority here. All right. So
yeah, that's a civil authority.
Yeah. So again, where would a civil authority be overridden by an ecclesiastical authority when it comes to being able to use these transport routes?
I don't see the relevancy of the transport routes here. I'm sorry, I haven't heard why that's relevant.
Well, in order, the relevancy would be, who had the authority in order to, again, going back to call, convene, and ratify. So in this case, it would be to call and convene in order to make sure that that the bishops are coming in and are able to participate in here. So again, without that civil authority, what authority did the Roman pontiff have in order to summon anyone outside of his own province?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to make an argument that because they couldn't use the roads, that somehow means that the Pope couldn't call these people, I mean, I could just concede that. That's fine. I mean, Father Domenico Palmieri, the leading Vatican I ecclesiologist, literally says verbatim that it is sometimes shown that the emperors exercise their civil authority impiously over the church. It cannot be conceded that this actually means they had any ecclesial authority, which you have to decree. You have to show that. You haven't shown that.
All right, that is time. Lance, this is your last round of rebuttal. I will start the time when you begin speaking. Or not rebuttal, cross-exam, my bad.
Awesome.
Also, there's been a couple comments. In this portion, they are allowed to, quote unquote, introduce new information. This cross-exam doesn't have to only be about the things they brought up in their opening statements. There's been a lot of questions or comments about introducing new information, which you guys are allowed to do, obviously, but I wanted to air that out.
Okay. So what comes first as seen by the church, or seen in the historical record, an ecclesiastical judgment or a civil promulgation?
Based on what I've seen in the historical record, it was the civil promulgation.
That's interesting. So you mentioned earlier Theodosius. Why is he saying that he's going to enact the judgment of Damasus on this? Or why does Pulcheria, hold on, let me actually switch my question here. Why is it then that Pulcheria is saying in letter 77 to Pope St. Leo the Great that she does not have this ability until he has decreed what the ecclesiastical rule is?
A big part of it is that he was one of Leo's fanboys and was upset that Leo didn't get his way about holding the council in Rome.
Pulcheria?
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't she just appealing to her husband, Emperor Marcion?
Well, why would she need to? Honestly, that's kind of the thing. She wouldn't have to.
Wait, under your view, she would have to appeal to the Emperor Marcion, but she's not doing that. She's saying, so authentitos, with you as the authority. Why is she saying that Leo is the authority on the congregation?
And again, it was because she was a Pope Leo. Well, I guess fanboy wouldn't necessarily be the right thing. Again, I appreciate the correction on that. She was a Pope Leo fangirl. You know, and this was one of the disagreements that she had with her husband.
That's actually interesting because at the Council of Chalcedon, the bishops actually write to Leo, asking him to ratify the council.
Can you clarify which bishops?
Yeah, the bishops of the entire council. It's the letter of the Synod of Chalcedon to Pope Saint Leo the Great.
So because not everybody agreed with what was happening here. So again, I'm wondering which specific bishops. This wouldn't have been. We can't say with a broad brush that it was every bishop at the council.
Yeah. So this is the Synod of Chalcedon to Pope Leo. So I don't know what you're asking here. It's the Synod of Chalcedon to Pope Leo.
Okay, and I guess for clarification on my end, are you suggesting that every single bishop at that council in Chalcedon were basically going in Leo's favor?
No, in fact, this is actually the interesting thing, and this is exactly why I brought up this letter. This is letter 98 from the Council of Chalcedon to Pope Leo, for anybody listening here. They're actually in this very letter begging for Leo to ratify Canon 28, which Leo does not end up ratifying, but nonetheless, they said, you are the head to the members. And you know what they say about the emperor in this letter? They say, our religious emperors presided for the furtherance of what? Due order. And then they give the analogy between Zerubbabel and Joshua. So
Is there a question in there?
well, I mean, he was asking me like, what is the actual thing here? My question for you is, why is it that the Council of Chalcedon is saying that Leo is the head to the members? He's the one who makes the decision. And Empress Pulcheria is saying this. Are they all just like Leo fangirls or fanboys or something?
Without knowing which bishops actually were part of that letter, I can't say for sure. So that's the issue here. Without knowing which bishops are writing this letter and everything like that, again, I'd have to look back into some things here. But
it's the entire council.
That's the assertion. We can make the assertion that it's the entire council, but that's too much of a blanket statement. We can't say that it's the entire council.
This is what Schaff says, who is, of course, the translator of this. It's letter 98 from the Council of Chalcedon to Pope St. Leo.
Okay, so again, which bishops are writing this letter? So again, I have to know which bishops are writing this letter. Are they? It may claim to be the bishops of the entire synod, but again, that's the issue that I'm coming across. Because they may claim it's all of them, but it's too broad of a brush. Not everybody would have agreed.
It's the acts of the council.
So in other words, the record is silent on this.
So, Lion, don't ask any.
That wasn't a question. That was a statement. The statement was.
It sounded like a question. My bad.
Yeah. So the statement is, in other words, the record is silent on this.
The record is not silent on this. I'm sure if I pulled up the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon on this, it would show me the bishops' names. It's not relevant because the entire Council of Chalcedon, all the bishops present, are writing this letter to Pope St. Leo. So I'm asking you, please answer my question. Are all the bishops present at Chalcedon and Pulcheria and Marcion and Anatolius, are they all Leo fanboys or fangirls now?
No, but we have to be very careful about saying all. We can't have a general statement about all. That's the issue at hand.
All? It's the Council of Chalcedon. Okay, wait. I need a minute back. This is a filibuster. He's not answering my question. Why is it that Pulcheria, the entire Council of Chalcedon, yes, the entire, it says the Council of Chalcedon, and Anatolius, the Bishop of Constantinople, and Marcion, why are they all asking him to ratify the council if this is the duty of the emperor? They're all telling him he's the head to members. They're all calling him so authontontos, you are the principal authority by which this is received.
So
this seems like a hard sell for a historical
again, without knowing who the bishops were, because yes, you can have an claim that it's an all-encompassing statement, but again, this is just like saying that there's a single author. Even though there's a single author of something
hold on, really quick.
Can I get a minute back? This is a filibuster.
Yeah, that was a bit filibuster. It is a direct question about all of the bishops. So
well, and that I would have to say is I would have to reject the premise that it is all of the bishops.
Okay, yeah, Lance, I am going to give you a minute back for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so then my last question is going to be about the Council of Constantinople I. Would you say that this council supports your position?
Which part of the council?
The council in general, the convocation, etc.
Can you repeat the question? You cut out for me for a second.
Would you say that the Council of Constantinople I is beneficial to your position?
In what way?
Your position is that an emperor alone constitutes the ecumenicity of a council, no?
Yeah, because without the ratification, without the actual teeth behind it, there is no. It's all symbolic otherwise.
Do you think that this council helps your position? Is going to be pertaining to your affirmative thesis, right?
So in Chalcedon 1, I'm still looking for that clarification. What part of Chalcedon 1 are you asserting as part of my position?
Okay, so we are going to move on to the open dialogue. We have 10 minutes. How do you guys?
You can start.
Let's just make sure we're not talking over. We're allowing time for questions to be answered. No filibustering, direct answers. If we can have them, that would be the best. I'll just pick a person to put a timer on. So I guess, Lion, he said you can go first. So I guess if you want to start the first question or however you want to start the open dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I thought we were just going to go straight to the Q&A from here and then go into closing after. But if that's
how much time do we have on the open dialogue? It's always 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, typically.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah. So again, the issue at hand here is that, again, like the aspect of ratification when it comes to an ecumenical council ultimately means nothing. We have several instances within the historical record where, without that seal of approval from the emperor, there is really like no reason to say that it has any kind of effect. Like, again, unless it has teeth behind it, unless there's actual consequences behind it, what does it matter? I mean, both Arius and there are two of them, and now I forget which one it was, but there are two of them that basically told the church, "Up yours, I don't agree." And that's the issue that we're having. It wasn't until the emperor said, "Okay, this is now the law of the land," that we have any kind of effect here. Arius didn't face any consequences until after Nicaea 1. He was excommunicated 4 years earlier, but was somehow convincing enough to convince other bishops that he really wasn't. And it's the same with others. So again, without that teeth behind it, what effect does it really have?
Yeah, so if you want to know the effect, at least from my view, the effect, at least on this side, is, I mean, Arius is going to be condemned. He's anathematized. He's not actually a bishop. He's doing this illicitly. Now, that he continued to go on and say, "Oh, I'm a bishop, look at me, listen to me." I mean, yeah, that's fine. We've had heretics do that throughout the centuries, despite an ecumenical council and an imperial council going against them. A great example of this is Nestorius. Nestorius, despite the fact that he was exiled, still went around saying that he was a bishop, and he founded the Assyrian Church of the East. So for you to say, "Oh, well, we see them actually have effect once they have imperial ratification," well, the effect that you're referring to here is merely exile. I mean, otherwise, truly, And this is what the unanimous, the Aco-apologetic in the comments is saying incorrect. Sorry, Assyrian Church of the East, I don't mean to attack you. But this idea of like a civil ratification being what actually seals the deal is just not the case. You're just pushing the goalpost to say, oh, now they're actually going to be exiled for this, right?
Well, but again, what consequences were in place by if there was just an ecclesiastical ratification necessary? What were the consequences?
Yeah, they would. Yeah, within the view of the church, they would go to hell. So I mean, I would say that's a pretty bad. I mean, I think that's worse than exile.
Well, and again, you can claim anyone can go to hell, but at the same time, apathy is a thing. And so if no one cares what the church says, what kind of effect does it really have?
It's interesting that you say no one cares what the church says.
And I said
because if. Well, they do care. I mean, it's clear that they do care because they continue appealing to the church. Like, for example, with Athanasius, the emperor exiled him, right? And yet, who did he go to get help? He continued to go to the Roman pontiff. He continued to go to Pope Julius to get help. And Pope Julius, who came out on top of this? Who came out on top? Pope Julius, or was it Constantius?
I mean, it happened 4 times, so obviously there was a bit of a seesaw effect going on here.
Who came out on top?
Well, in the end, I mean, Athanasius was still exiled, actually, in the end, when push comes to shove.
Right. Pope St. Julius came out on top, right? Because St. Athanasius is revered by all, and Constantius is only known by people who research church history.
So the problem is that, again, the aspect here is, no, because again, according to the record here, Athanasius was still in exile and wasn't able to come back, despite Julius's occasion. Like, he was still exiled again and again and again and again.
Yeah, so because they were being oppressed by an emperor, that was nothing new at the time. Most of the bishops that were present at Nicaea had limbs chopped off from when they were oppressed by emperors previous to Constantine. Emperors throughout church history were persecuting Christians. This is nothing new, okay? So when you say, oh, look, an emperor does this thing, okay, but you have to look at the actual effect of what's going on. The church makes a decision. Emperors do reject them, but when the church has made a solemn promulgation, that's that, right?
The problem is that, like, again, this doesn't have the same type of element here, because again, if there is, like, for instance, 2 powers, who comes out on top? So you're saying that the Pope came out on top in the case of Athanasius, but in every other instance. And even then, he didn't really come out on top because he was still exiled in the end, even posthumously. So the issue at hand here is ultimately who had the authority to really do anything and enforce anything. Just because someone may be threatened with hell doesn't necessarily mean that that's enough in order to make them to stop their heresy.
Your question begging, because one thing that I clarified in my opening statement was the fact that I do concede that imperials had this civil power. That's not a problem. What you're trying to do is you're trying to say, oh, this civil power is what makes the church, is what makes the church's decisions set in stone. I'm telling you, no, the civil power, it doesn't matter. And as Athanasius, the presiding bishop, a presiding deacon at Nicaea says, if a judgment has been passed by bishops, what concern had the emperor with it? Or if it was only the threat of the emperor, what need in that case was there of so many
Here's
bishops?
the problem with that. If that weren't already settled practice, there would have been no need to write such a thing.
I mean, but that's the thing.
Was it or was it not settled practice, Lance?
In writing?
Not just in writing, because they can protest it. But the thing is that in writing something like that, they're basically saying, this is what has been done. We don't like it. It needs to be different.
Well,
if it wasn't settled practice, why write something like that?
Wait, do you know what the Catholic doctrinal development thesis is? because I don't have to say that Pope Julius or
Well, and
Saint
again,
Athanasius.
this discussion is not about theology here. It's about what's on the historical record.
It's not, but it's we're talking about a historical thing because the development of doctrine pertains to both theology and history, right? So I can see perfectly fine that Julius might not have known all the things that Vatican I teaches. That's fine, but he's clearly.
Well, why are we appealing to Vatican I? That's outside the scope here.
I didn't appeal to it. I gave an example. He's not. I'm saying Julius doesn't have to know that. I'm saying Julius knew he had the authority to say this council that was convened by an emperor impiously has no authority whatsoever because they didn't come to me. And then after the fact, it was recognized that that was the case. Like Tyre was quickly rejected, despite the fact that it had literally all the same machinery as Nicaea. It had all of the same machinery, but it was never rejected by another council directly.
The problem is that every single one of the appeals you just listed still needed the emperor to actually convene the assembly that ultimately settled the matter.
That's fine. That's fine. I've said that, and I've said that over and over again. The fact that material convocation is not what makes a council ecumenical. We're talking about only an emperor. This is what it says right here. According to the historical record, only an emperor can call, convene, and ratify an ecumenical council with or without the consent of Rome. So why are these not ecumenical? That's my question to you.
Because later emperors overturned them.
Then why was Anastasios not able to overturn?
Because he didn't convene a council.
Why?
He didn't want to.
He was so rampantly against Chalcedon. He was going against it. He was exiling
people. How effective do you think he was as an emperor?
I mean, given that later emperors like Anastasios literally like cut the tongue out of Saint Maximus the Confessor and exiled.
No. Him in particular, not later emperors. Him.
Anastasios?
Yes.
Yeah, he was a pretty effective emperor. He was, by your standard.
Effective
he was
how?
He was exiling people. By your standard, that should be sufficient.
Because of previous things. But again, that doesn't mean he had a desire to convene a council, despite him being against one. His entire aspect is whether or not he had the desire to. It had nothing to do with whether or not.
Time for that. So we have our closing statements now. They are. I don't have how long the closing statements are on here. What were they? 5 minutes?
They're 5 minutes. Yeah.
Was it 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
I go.
Are we doing Q&A and then closing, or closing then Q&A?
We're going to do closing and then Q&A. I don't think we have a lot of questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question, if you have a question for Latter-day Lion, please address it directly to Josu, who's on the panel, and he will write them down and gather them. We'll probably do 5 questions each. If you have a question for Lance, please address it to Latter-day Logic, who is below Latter-day Lion, so that he can write those down. We'll do a minute for whoever is directed the question to. We'll have a minute to respond, and then 45 seconds for the other person to get in their point about that question. So for the closing statements, Lance is going to go first, and then Latter-day Lion will have the final say. Lance, I will start your 5-minute timer whenever you start speaking.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, this was a great debate. I think that, this debate really revolves around a lot of history that's hard to look at. It's hard to find. A lot of times you're scanning through Mansi documents where they're completely in Latin still, or Greek documents. You're trying to find a PDF copy of Theodoret of whoever the heck. But what I think I've noticed in this debate is the fact that my opponent has confused civil ratification and ecclesiastical judgment. He's put civil ratification before ecclesiastical judgment when that's not what we see. We see repeatedly, in the words of the very Saint Damasus that I had cited previous, he's making a request. He says, "We request your clemencies," writing to the emperor, "to make an order that if anyone shall have been condemned by the judgment of Damasus or ourselves who are Catholics and shall unjustly wish to retain a church, or when called by priestly judgment is absent through insolence," blah, blah, blah. He is saying the judgment that we make, you put into effect. And we see this We see this in Constantinople 1. It was the judgment of Gregory and Nectarius, whose judgment was actually civilly ratified by Theodosius. We have Damasus even going through, and he actually ratifies Constantinople 1 in its doctrinal content, though not ecumenically, until Chalcedon, which is what I attempted to push on at the end of my conversation there. Furthermore, we see Constantine himself saying that he is not who makes the decisions of the council. He's saying they make the decisions, he puts it into law. They make the decisions, he puts it into law. We see this just the same with Nicaea II, which we didn't get into, but this would have been great if we got the Council of Heraea, which was convened by an emperor, had multiple bishops present, and yet it was rejected by the Bishop of Rome. Nobody accepts Heraea now. Because what does Nicaea II say? It's very clear. It says it's the judgment of the Bishop of Rome that is the rule, not the emperor. The emperor merely reflects what ecclesiastical law has. Justinian himself recognizes this when he's writing letters to Pope John II. John II's writing letters back to him, and he's saying, I will put what you've said into civil law. Justinian saying, oh, we're going to give everything we can to you so that you can make your decision. Nonetheless, I don't think that my opponent has made a case here for Caesaropapism. And when you read the historical history, when you read these historical documents, you don't see Caesaropapism, especially when you read the very people that presided the council themselves. You keep reading emperors, then maybe sure you'll find emperors who boast. But emperors were boasting before Nicaea. They were cutting the heads off of Christians. This is nothing new. Emperors love to overstep their bounds. This is nothing new. I also think the final point of my opening statement that was not addressed was the fact that the only reason that emperors had this ability, that the church was letting the emperors do this, was because of the fact that A, there was a civil law that said that they couldn't do this without the consent of the emperor. This is something that the emperor had since before the birth of Christ. This is from Caesar's days. People could not assemble in the Roman Empire without the consent of the emperor. This is nothing new. It's only after the Great Schism, of course, that we start to see that the Roman pontiff himself has the material means to be able to ratify a council or convene a council himself. And I'm sure that the LDS are not too unsympathetic to that. They have a lot of money and they love calling their own general assemblies every single year. They don't want the state involved. Nobody wants the state involved. So at the end of the day, we can see that the very minute that the emperor was no longer a necessary material factor for the convocation of an ecumenical council, it transitions over to the responsibility of the Roman pontiff or those who can actually do this. For example, we see later in church history, and this is my closing statement, so I'll bring this up, that when popes were disagreeing amongst themselves at the Council of Constance, Sigismund was helping this whole process. Never once did he say he had a decision in it. He was acting just like many of these good emperors, these pious emperors, as Ambrose calls them, who stay out of ecclesiastical judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. All right, Lion, I will give you your 5 minutes whenever you start speaking.
What's interesting that my opponent does is that every single one of the appeals he made still needed an emperor to actually convene the assembly that settled every single matter brought up. Being the preferred party bishops wrote to or approached for support is not the same as holding the specific power to call, convene, or ratify or enforce a council. It's prestige. It's not the mechanism that this entire resolution is about. The issue at hand is his claim of a pope having sole ecclesiastical authority and that it outweighs imperial power. With all of the historical documentation that we have, it only shows that it's evidence of what Rome wished were true. And he's making that argument precisely because it wasn't the operating reality. It's the same thing with all of the other mentions here, with Chalcedon, with all of the other councils that were broken out. And notice here too, he appealed to councils that were outside of the scope of this debate. The scope of this debate was only to focus on the 7 accepted ecumenical councils. And he didn't do that. He appealed several times, at least in his opening and rebuttal, to Vatican I. And this is something that I think would be very, very important to understand. Again, even the aspects here of whether or not the bishop had any authority at all, it does not change the fact that the emperor had the authority in order to allow people to use the roads of transport that were there, and to be able to make sure that these councils were in place. The emperors, and in the one case, the Empress Irene, stated specifically in their Sacra that it is by our pious authority. And so the only issue at hand is whether or not the ratifications are strictly meant on an ecclesiastical front, in which case, what use are they? Or if they actually had any teeth behind them. That has been my argument the entire time. What teeth is behind the decisions the councils made? And that is is something that my opponent has not addressed. The issues that are facing here, his concession that, oh, they're condemned to hell. Well, what if they don't accept the authority of the church at that point? However, the emperor said that if you don't accept the ecclesiastical or the doctrines of the church, you're going to be exiled, or in some extreme cases, executed. Just because the emperor may move outside of the authority of the church does not mean that the church had the authority to do what needed to be done. Only the emperor did. Only the emperor had the teeth, the ability, the seal to ratify every single council made. Even when councils that were later termed non-ecumenical were not overturned because the church overturned them. They were overturned because the emperor overturned them. It wasn't the church that did so. So the one thing that we need to remember is when push comes to shove, the distinction at hand is whether or not the ecclesiastical authority is more reputable and more important, or whether there's actually needed to be teeth there. And in order for a ecumenical council to be effective, in order for it to be truly ratified, there needs to be teeth involved. And without that teeth, there is nothing that the church could do. And with that, I yield my time.
All right, so it is the Q&A period. So I believe we can start with Latter-day Lion. So Joshi, what questions do you have for Latter-day Lion? I'll give him a 1-minute timer after you ask the question.
Okay, hello. So firstly, that was an epic and total Catholic victory. Bravo, Lance.
Let's keep
So-
it to just questions, please.
Of course, that was just my side remark.
Don't need a
So
commentary.
the first question is from the first question comes from Moxie, which is, what is the proof that the legates did not understand or speak Greek in Nicaea 1 and 2?
Repeat the question. You broke up for me.
This is from Moxie. Proof for the legates being unable to speak or understand Greek in Nicaea 1 or 2.
So it was in Nicaea 2, and that was primarily because the council was held in Greek. So in Nicaea 1, it wasn't held in Greek.
Is that the response?
Yes. The,
Is that-
histor- the
is that your
historical,
fault?
the
Okay.
historical record says that Nicaea 2 was held in Greek.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, Lance.
Yeah.
Do I respond to that?
Yeah, so I'll give you probably 30 seconds to respond.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't really see the purpose of quarreling over whether the legate spoke Greek. It's actually an interesting thing, though, that he brings up Nicaea too, especially that they didn't speak Greek, because when the Acts were translated to Latin, they were actually mistranslated, which is what prompted the Council of Frankfurt. And they thought that Nicaea too was teaching a latria of icons. What's funny about this, though, is the Council of Frankfurt, while it was presided over primarily by bishops and convened by Charlemagne, Charlemagne literally says that it's the judgment of the Bishop of Rome that makes a council ecumenical, which is why they thought that they were rejecting Nicaea too, because they didn't know that it
Okay.
had.
All right, that's your 30 seconds. I don't know if 30 seconds is enough time to really respond. We might just do one response from whoever the question is asked. I'll give you, Latter-day Lion, a chance to respond to this first question for him, and then we'll probably just do the person asked the question responds, if that's okay.
Yeah, that works.
All right, Devin, what question do you have for Lance?
Okay. First question for Lance. Why aren't you wearing a suit? Just kidding. Here we go. This is from Jakey Returns. The question is, are there any other denominations in the modern day that claim to adhere to prophetic and apostolic authority rather than bishops or preachers?
Let's keep it to questions that involve the prompt.
Okay. X-Man says, according to Eusebius of Caesarea, Constantine urged the bishops to accept the creed with the insertion of the word homoousios. If this terminology was simply the universally received apostolic formula, why did the emperor have to advocate its insertion and explain its meaning to the bishops?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how this would accept the conclusion that my opponent tries to propose. But, I mean, quite simply, Constantine was there to have the council have order, to have the peace of the council. He says this directly. So if he's urging them to do this, it's likely because of the fact that Osius of Cordoba was his personal theologian, as was Eusebius of Caesarea. So Eusebius is most likely, because of the fact Eusebius was also doing the same thing. He was saying, oh, we should use my baptismal formula. We should use my baptismal formula. So, I mean, yeah, Constantine was doing this at the behest of bishops telling him to do so. I don't see why this would, once again, this is bishops to the emperor, bishop to the emperor, not emperor to bishop. This is, I mean, Ambrose says this is fine.
All right, Josh, next question for Lion, please.
Goyed asked, why was Trullo not received as ecumenical, even though it was received imperially?
It was considered ecumenical until it was overturned by a later council.
Trullo?
Is that the full response?
Yeah, I don't have to elaborate. Just that's it.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry. What council overturned Trullo?
Devin, if you want to ask your next question to Lance.
Yes, here we go. Sorry, technology. All right. Daniel M80 says, did any councils have no emperor involvement?
No, as I've already said, the emperor would not have allowed a council to occur due to civil law that had existed before the time of Christ. So, I mean, no, because the emperors forced themselves to be a part of these councils. And for the most part, the bishops accepted them willingly when they were good emperors, and of course, badly when they were bad emperors, which, happens both throughout history. So.
Is that your full response?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Josh, your next question for Lion.
So it's going to be an additional question that Goyed asked, which was, what council overturned Trullo?
I'll admit I'm blanking on it, So I can't remember. I do remember, though, that it was overturned by a following council.
You don't remember the name
I don't
of the
recall.
council?
I don't recall, no.
Okay, Devin, if you want to ask your question to Lance.
Bastamus says, given that the authority to command foreigners to travel across national borders lies only with the emperor, would it not be required for the emperor to ensure a full council?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, yeah. I, I'm sorry. These are a lot of these questions are things that I've addressed in my opening statement. I do say very clearly that material convocation pertains to imperial power at this time because they were the only ones who had the material means by which to convene a council. I've said this repeatedly. An emperor was needed for this case because of the fact that he was the only one that had the means. When we look at the council of, I believe it's Tyre even, or no, Arles, sorry. There were bishops that were coming from Britain who didn't need the imperial support, so they just came. Of course, they had to have imperial permission to cross the roads, but they denied the need for food and all of these things. And so we can see that this imperial power is being used to help the bishops. It's not being used to coerce the bishops. So that doesn't get you to the conclusion you wish it to get you to.
All right, I think that's 3 questions each so far, if my count is not off. Okay, Josh, if you want to ask your next question to Lion, please.
This is from every female werewolf
From Emmy.
ever. Oh, okay. From Emmy. Why doesn't Nicaea 2 mention an emperor in its definition
Can you repeat the question? I don't think I quite got all of that.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. There was just a little bit of
Okay.
yeah.
So the question is, why doesn't Nicaea 2 mention an emperor in its definition of councils?
I would respond, it doesn't have to. There's no need for it. It's just part of the established tradition already.
Okay. Latter-day Logic, if you want to ask your next question for Lance.
Next question. But this is from Oluwa. Given that premier Catholic historians like Bishop Karl Joseph von Hefele and contemporary patristic scholar Father Richard Price document how emperors actively exiled bishops, enforced political theological formulas, and threw the weight of state power behind specific creeds, are you arguing that the outcomes of these councils were arrived at purely through uncoerced spiritual consensus, or do you admit that imperial theological influence heavily dictated the results?
This is a stacked question, man. Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to go into this. So first off, about the civil law and the exiling of bishops. As I said, the actual council itself was free to make a decision. It was the emperor that decided to, basically put into place the decisions of a council. Of course, we see some emperors going into a council with a preposition of what they think the council is going to decree. And then as to the third part of that question, which I think related to, sorry, could you read that question again? It was really long, dude.
It was long. Okay, here's the question again by Oluwa.
Yeah.
Given that premier Catholic historians like Bishop Karl Joseph von Hefele and contemporary patristic scholar Father Richard Price document how emperors actively exiled bishops, enforced political theological formulas, and threw the weight of state power behind specific creeds, are you arguing that the outcomes of these councils were arrived at purely through uncoerced spiritual consensus, or do you admit that imperial theological influence heavily dictated the results?
Yeah, it was uncoerced, but there were a lot of presuppositions in the question itself that I wanted to address, but I don't want to use up my entire minute. So
Yeah, that was a heck of a question. All right, Josh, if you want to ask I think this is last question.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
So, Bible Nerd asks, if emperors alone hold this power, why was Ephesus II rejected as a robber council, despite full imperial convocation and ratification?
Yeah, so there are two. So in this particular case, it's two emperors, two councils that are essentially 2 years apart from each other, but it's the same imperial mechanism. Really, the only thing that changed was who held the throne. It stayed binding law for as long as I want to say it was Theodosius was the emperor, but it wasn't until it was reversed when the next emperor took the throne. So it was still binding until the next emperor took the throne on that.
All right, Devin, if you want to ask the last question.
Also by the same person, Bible Nerd, with a number 3 instead of an E because he's cool. Question is, does an emperor have authority over theological truth, or does imperial ratification merely make church canons into civil law?
yeah, it's going to be the latter, as is attested by every single bishop who talks about it in the entirety of church history. It's going to be the latter, because of the fact that when you're seeing these councils, they have a decision that is made by the council, and then that decision is going to be ratified by the emperor. In fact, this is what happens in non-ecumenical councils too, which is why I tried to bring those up. Because if it's just the fact that an emperor signs on to it that makes it ecumenical, then you'd have all these other councils that'd be considered ecumenical, and we'd be talking about 12 more councils here today, but we're not. The point is there has to be some delineation between why are these councils considered ecumenical and these aren't. And I personally contend that it's the ratification of the Bishop of Rome that makes it such. But yeah, the emperors, they merely reflect what the decisions of the councils is. So yeah, as Justinian in his own codex says.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. That does conclude the debate officially. Can we get a little more clarification on the Council of Trullo? Because I would like to know a little bit more about that specifically. If that was considered ecumenical and then overturned later.
The East wanted it to be ecumenical, but the West didn't receive it. It was never.
Okay, so it wasn't considered universally ecumenical.
Yeah, correct. It was more akin to like a provincial council or a diocesan council.
Yeah, if I remember right, it's like Council 5.5, essentially, at least in the East.
Yeah. They basically viewed it as kind of like an appendix to Constantinople too. So, sometimes some people attach it to Constantinople 3, but
yeah.
Nonetheless, Trullo, it didn't have papal consent, so nobody really considers
Well,
it
Rome, to be fair, Rome wasn't involved at all in that one. So.
Alrighty.
Okay. Right on. Thank you very much, guys. That was fantastic. I appreciate both of you for taking the time to put all that together and be here. I think it was a good debate. I will make sure that I send both of you the recordings for it so that you guys can post it if you so choose.
All right. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I will be
awesome.
hosting
Thank
an
you.
after debate live on my page, so
all right.
Welcome, say hi.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, God bless you, Latter-day Lion.
God bless, Lance. All right. Well, with that in mind, guys, for those of you on YouTube, thank you very much for coming. I will actually be doing a follow-up on my TikTok. So if you're following me on there, go ahead and come across, and we'll have some fun. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.